Now, Christmas, everything is supposed to be perfect, right? Right? Wrong. Christmas is never perfect. No day is ever perfect. There's always some bell tables in the way, or there's some obstruction in your life. I heard about this church. It was a small country church. They had lots of decorations down their center aisle, and they were trying to do what we did with the wise men and the choir last night. They tried to walk down the aisle amongst all the decorations and poinsettias that were placed all around the aisle. And as our choir oftentimes does, their choir was beginning to walk down the center aisle. And it was about every 3 pews, a new choir person would be walking down. And this was this old country church, and there was a grate from the furnace that was on the side of the aisle. So it was kind of out of the way of the center part of the aisle, but with all the decorations and everything, people had to walk around that grate. And when one of the altos was walking down, her pencil-thin stiletto shoes went into the grate. And talk about the perfect Christmas not quite working out. Everybody was singing, "Oh, come, all ye faithful." And as she was coming down the aisle, she was stuck, and she couldn't move any further. And so she tried to yank her foot out of the grate, and she couldn't do it. And so she figured the only way to get herself out of that grate was to just take off her shoe and leave it behind. And so she goes limping up the aisle. Now the tenors were coming right behind this alto, and the lead tenor that was following her figured, she can't just leave her shoe there. Besides, the rest of the choir coming behind me is going to trip over her shoe. So without missing a beat, he kind of stooped down, and he just gave that shoe a nice fast twist and picked it up. And up came the grate. So he goes walking up with the shoe and the grate. And then you can imagine what happened when the basses started coming down the aisle. You know, there is no perfect Christmas, right? I like what one fella, Dean Merrill, I think is the guy's name, he wrote The Perfect Christmas. He said that really the story of Christmas is about the perfect one who enters into the mess of our life and comes near. And that's what Christmas is about. We've been talking about the character Ebenezer Scrooge through this season of Christmas this year. And here this story of Ebenezer Scrooge talks about this fella who's kind of going through his Christmas season, and all he finds is reasons for bah humbug. And I suppose we could all find reasons for bah humbug in our lives, but I think about the very first Christmas where Mary received the message that she was going to have a baby, this unmarried woman now being pregnant, and the angel's voice comes to her and says, "Be of good cheer." And what would your response be? Right. Bah. Oh no. And yet I think of her response, and it's really the response that God calls for all of us. It's the response, "May it be to me as you have said." And then she says, "My soul glorifies the Lord." One of the things that strikes me about Mary is just her amazing open humbleness. I mean, she was not victorious in a sense of saying, "Oh yes, hail me, the mother of God. The Lord is with me." We say that about her, but she didn't say that about herself. She said, "May it be to me as you have said." It's this humble openness that she has. And that's what we're invited to do as we come here before the Lord in communion today, a humble openness to God. As we look at the new year ahead of us, how do we open ourselves up to the possibility that God, who worked back then when God created the universe saying, "Let there be light," and that one who then became light in the world for us through his Son, Jesus Christ, how can that one who is light become light in our life in the new year? How can that happen for us? I would say, just as a suggestion to us, that it comes through a humble openness. A humble openness. The same kind of humble openness that Mary had to the Lord. There was a proud John. You don't know any proud Johns? Anybody here John? Sorry. It's a common name. This guy's name was John. Hi, John. This guy's name was John. And young John, he was young. He made a commitment when he was about your age and your size that he was going to commit his life to making money. That's what he was going to live for. That's what he was going to be about. And by the time he was 33, he became really one of the world's first millionaires. And by the time he was 43, this John became the owner of the biggest company in the world. And by the time he was 53, he actually became the first billionaire that the world has ever had. This John was a very self-made man, and the world was all about him and his wealth. And this guy who actually made $1 million a day couldn't eat anything because his stomach was torn up inside. In fact, he developed this stress disease where he lost all the hair on his head. He even lost his eyebrows and his eyelashes. This was a guy whose world was all about him and all about power. And in the state of Pennsylvania, everybody, and I don't use this word very much at all. It's a 4-letter word that I don't like to use. It's the word hate. And yet everybody in Pennsylvania hated this guy, John. He lived for himself. He lived all about himself. And in fact, he was so stressed out and torn up inside that the doctors doubted that he'd live another year. And he went to bed one night, kind of like the story of Scrooge that we've read about this Christmas season. And when he went to bed, he started thinking about his life and what he was living for. And he realized that he could live all his life and make all the money in the world and live for himself, but he wasn't going to be able to take a dime with him. I remember at one of my son's graduation, one of the guys that graduated with him was a son of Denzel Washington. And Denzel Washington, when I think they gave him a doctorate or something at the ceremony. And one of the things that he said is, "How often do you ever see a U-Haul following a hearse? You can't take it with you. No matter how famous you are or how much you have, you can't take it with you." And John came to this, what you might call a come to Jesus moment in the night. And he realized he couldn't take it with him. And so he made a commitment to start giving his money away. And he just started giving it away to churches. He started a foundation. And his foundation did a great deal of medical research. In fact, the medical research that he underwrote through his foundation helped to support the development of penicillin that has cured so many people and saved so many lives. And it's really developed such wonder medications over the years. And here this man who they thought would die at 53 because he was just so messed up, was able, even at 53, to turn his life around, to live for something beyond himself. And then John D. Rockefeller died at 93. A much happier man, a much more fulfilled man, a man who'd experienced much more joy in his life because he had learned how to just give it away instead of just living for himself. Well, as we come to our time of communion today, we're looking at how life that has been given to us can really best be lived as we give it away to others. And one of the best responses that any person, I believe at least, can have in response to the gift of God to us is just to say, I give myself back to you. Because we can trust God. And so this communion that we offer you today is really about trust. It's an opportunity for us to give our trust to God, who created us and to whom we shall return, and to thank God for the blessings of his living presence in our life. Let's take a few moments of quiet before the Lord now, shall we? And let's just take some time to pray in our own way, however you'd like to pray. Think about God, talk to God. Maybe you haven't talked to God for a while, but talk to God. Just in this space, say, God, just talk to God. Let's take time for quiet, shall we?